seemed as if Freud was really exceptional in that. But in fact, during that period, the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, the metaphorics of war was everywhere. Was in biology, was in immunology, in the rhetoric of hygiene movement, eugenics, the germ movement of Pasteur. Everything you look at, metaphorics of war was everywhere. Freud wasn't unique. So the question is then, if it was so common, is it really the case that we have to look at it as something that is really important in what he does, or is it just, how would I say, a rhetorical move which links what he does to many others that do scientific work?
Okay. Well, I do think it's important, and I think I look at it. I mean, I take completely what you say, but the interesting thing is that this rhetoric got lost in the psychoanalytic tradition. I mean, Freud is important in this respect, I think, because later psychoanalysts do not take up this metaphorical repertoire. So the repertoire then becomes either more scientific or more compassionate, or focusing on meaning and getting rid of the whole scientific apparatus. So I think the debates from Freud onwards are not on this issue, but on these other schools of thought that I outlined. So for me it's important to go back to that, and in that particular respect, I'm glad that you place him in his historical context, but I think in that respect he plays a central role in, also because he was the founder of the discipline, but I think it's important to the understanding of Freud's project that we keep in mind this particular metaphorical repertoire that then disappears.
So my point is not just that it's common, but it's also used in the rhetoric of movements and works that pretend to be scientific. That's the point.
Yeah, but not only. I mean, I guess that scientific movements and scientific theories use it because it has a popular appeal. It doesn't turn something into science.
No, but
so this I don't accept in your question. I accept, of course, that there is a historical context in which this was done. Freud was not the only one. But using a repertoire of war does not make something scientific. Using a repertoire of war makes science accessible to non-scientists. So it doesn't work in the way that you suggest. It works only the other way around.
No, I think, no. So what I'm asking is, given that, whether Freud's use of it is actually in order to, in one way or another, to make the appeal of what he does similar to that of the hygienic movement, of eugenics, of the talk about germs and so on and so forth, whether he doesn't know beginnings of immunology, all of it, but he doesn't want to put his work on a par with this, and therefore he uses it.
No, I don't think so. I think we are speaking of people who wrote around the First World War, where war was an immensely present experience to all of them.
That's before the war.
Yeah, but much of what I quoted is already in and after the war. So I think, there was the French-Prussian War and so on. I think war was a strong presence, and it had to do with making a certain discourse that otherwise would seem very strange and new, accessible to lay people. So no, I don't think so.
Sure.
So since all the speakers began with a personal note, addressing the center, I take the liberty to do the same in my question. So, if we had to start it all over again, I would start with this panel. And in some ways, this, at least for me, was how I envisioned what the center should be about. Not about the ethics of the sciences, as in bioethics, for example, but rather how asking the question of the ethical would transform the way we do science. We think about the basic and core questions in the respective sciences, and what we've seen here is an example of how this could be done in 3 different disciplines, in law, psychology, and anthropology. And the first reading that we had for the seminar was, and I never tried that again, but was Maimonides' Introduction to the Teachings of the Fathers. And I thought there was a kind of a pre-modern science of the soul, which was closely tied to the ethical. And I thought that there was something there in this Aristotelian medieval account that there was some truth there that we could ask if its relevance in today's thinking about the sciences. And there's a history of that through moral philosophy as the basis of some of the social sciences. Now, hearing today's presentations and comparing it with Maimonides, I think that some resemblance or affinities between the talks comes up. So, one is a kind of a critique of the universal laws, of the procedure, actually the exceptional. Chaim was pointing out to this most clearly in his discussion of the fading away of the other into some kind of universalisms, and then I thought of the ethical as something that would counter that move to universalizing, generalizing, closure. Sometimes in the language of a warfare, of a tension, of agonistic, sometimes in some kind of secrecy, or in that which cannot exactly be said in words and translated into words. But what I think, and this is more of an observation than a question, so maybe the question would be, what do you think about this observation? The observation is that for most of you, if not for all of you, there's an encroachment of the system and an attempt to save something of the ethical in the margins. Whereas for Maimonides, the ethical was at the center of the endeavor. Chaim was talking about a very marginal phenomena that almost on the verge of the human, in order to save something of the otherness that was so central in his mind for anthropology. And in your account, again, the saving the procedure in face of the rise of values was the move. Just I'm not sure exactly how that works for you, but it seems to me that a similar thing could be said about psychoanalysis. Maybe you'd like to say a few words. But it seems to me that now the ethical is really a place of kind of a small emancipatory space that we're trying to save from something else that's happening.
Well, I mean, if we do mention Zygmunt Bauman, L'chiyuv or L'shlila, I think he was onto it big time with trying to figure out how. I mean, he was onto it while he was participating in it. So the idea of multitudes or wasted lives, or calling, immense populations on the planet a category that was therefore useless, was pointing to how literally the question of value and efficiency and achievement was transforming the system, and literally, I mean, we're back, it's very easily back to Adorno and Horkheimer here. It's not very, very complicated. It's just this idea where you have this instrumental rationality taken to the umpteenth degree, and then the place of ethics is left for performance alone, and not really in order to do something, because if the point is efficiency, and the point is achieving efficiency at any cost, be it personal efficiency, self-maximization, even self-enlightenment, or realizing it doesn't matter what kind of efficiency, but as soon as it's that, then you don't have room for the common value. You do have room for the personal values, which I don't think that we spoke about, any of us, for the personal ethic. But in terms of finding the common ethic, that gets really diverted to the margins, because there's no room for it. Where are you going to put it?
But Shai, I would challenge you, and what I heard in the 3 presentation is a call to bring the ethical to the center. And maybe because I'm preoccupied with borders now, I would suggest another way of looking at it is relinquishing the thought, the postmodern thought or move towards a borderless world, and realizing the centrality and importance and vitality of borders, and starting to talk about ethical borders. I think we were never postmodern, and we're certainly not postmodern today. And what the political shifts that we are witnessing, I think, is
If we were postmodern, we don't have a choice anymore.
and
right?
and even if we were postmodern, we were in this elite, universe of postmodernism, which does not correlate with I think humanity. So shifting from every discipline back to borders, and talking about realizing that we must have borders, we cannot live without them, and talking about ethical borders is a way of bringing the ethics back to the center. But Yolan, you wanted to...
Just a small comment. It's more related to what you just said. If the purpose of Freud was to make people happier by some kind of scientific inquiry, preceded him was Lucretius. He wanted to relieve the fear of divine retribution attached to every natural disaster by showing that the physics of nature has nothing to do with divinity. So I think this is, from early on, we had the connection. If human happiness has anything to do with ethics, physics was to be, in the beginning, was supposed to serve that more than anything else. Explanation as liberation from fear. Now, in contemporary science, this is not exactly the case. But like in the case of democracy, what the Greek envisioned has turned many, many different transformations until coming to our age. But it's quite nice to remember what it was there in the beginning.
Chaim, you want to?
No, what I was suggesting actually, and obviously it didn't come through properly, is to suspend ethics. It's to suspend ethics for the sake of re-inheriting it in different terms and different circumstances. That particular category that I call the fourth space, or the extra-cultural domain, where people are divested of their morals, ethics, cultural presence, and so on.
But that came out very clearly, Chaim, and I think that I wonder whether, if asked, why was this important? Why is it so important to garnish this space where there's no room for the morality of the social scientists turned into moral activists? Then your answer would be, I think, but now I'm asking, your answer would be that there's something about humanity that needs to be saved there from moralism. I mean, that there is something there that you're trying to save in the science of anthropology from what has taken over in anthropology. So
I want to save anthropology from its sanctimonious pretentiousness.
Yes. But isn't that similar to trying to save something about our humanity? Exactly in these dehumanized forms of the human?
I'm trying to say something about ethics. I mean, I'm trying to say that ethics, that this is a test case, that extra-cultural category is a test case for the non-universalistic nature of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
I could add here something. I think that I would like to hear some of the people here who are talking and worried about ethics. What do you see about what do you say about the implications of normative perspectivism? Because when we talk about a multiplicity of value perspectives, how does it affect our concept of ethics and morality? And we have a serious issue here, which deals not only with law and with science, and politics, political science. I think part of the problem of the pessimism of many contemporary moral thinkers is facing this normative perspectivism as a social reality or political reality, which is very difficult to cope with.
So thanks. It was very interesting, and I was thinking when you were talking about it reminded me of a sort of maybe imagined narrative of law from becoming casuistic to like rule rationally based, and you're describing a casuistic phase of psychoanalysis, and I was thinking maybe it's just because it's a very young discipline. And maybe it really reminded me also of doctors, because doctors are also very casuistic in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And still they have ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe it's, it's a gradual, it's going to happen. That, and the other point, related point is that you kept saying that there's a win-win situation between the analyzer and the patient. And that's a bit naive, maybe it's not a win-win situation. Maybe there is a real war going on in the clinic. I'm not familiar with the literature, but I can imagine. So that brings me back to ethics. Maybe that's a place that can create an ethical sort of.
Yeah, I think there are 2 points that you raise that also actually tie up with your talk. One is the casuistic element, and I think, yes, I think it makes it tremendously important to have very strict rules for psychoanalytic practice because it's a warlike situation. So there have to be very strict boundaries that have to be kept by the analyst, for instance. And this is a constant worry in psychoanalytic circles, of course, because of the dependence, because it's an emotionally very laden space and so on. So there have to be very strict boundaries. And so in that sense, it would be the procedures that are very, very strict and demand strict adherence by the practitioner. And one of the worries of the last, I would say, 2 decades with emergence of new schools in psychoanalysis, the subjective relational, is that they decided that these procedures can be relaxed much more, and by the similar arguments that because they are very ethical as professionals, so there's no need for such strict procedures. And of course, exactly the worries that you were talking about come up, that if these rules are no longer so strict, but it is a real dilemma because of course, very strict rules do make for very harsh bureaucracies. So psychoanalysts have been very much accused before of being very bureaucratic in their behavior towards patients. If any of you read these books by Janet Malcolm about how she meets New York psychoanalysts, and they talk endlessly about the problem whether they shake hands or do not shake hands with patients when they come into the consulting room, then this is a ridiculously bureaucratic attitude. What is the right protocol? Do I shake hands? Do I not shake hands? So there you have very strict procedures, and they protect the weak, but they also create a situation that I think in law is much more appropriate or much more tolerable. They create a very, very limiting, stifling, and restricting situation, which perhaps in a legal procedure is okay, but in a psychoanalytic context would be even more problematic. But then you relax these procedures, and then you open up the weak, in that sense, the analysand, to possible exploitation and so on by the analysand much more. So I think the the development that you kind of sketched, including the dangers that result from it, I think one can do a parallel sketch on the development of psychoanalysis in terms of procedures and ethics in that sense, or values.
Can I just want to say something about the normative perspectiveness. Now, I don't know if this is out far afield, but it might be. So I've been very interested in empires, all kinds of empires, Mughal empires, Ottoman empires, and what they do to kind of lay down the law, especially when newcomers are coming. Then I discovered that Genghis Khan actually invented the first passport, but I'll tell you over coffee. But one of the things that, so these are not democratic governments in any way. I mean, they're empires, they're ruled by force, by, hereditary or whatever, and yet they create possibility for multiple normative arrangements with very limited shared ethics in clear boundaries, where communities with no fences, but clear boundaries. Millet system in the Ottoman Empire. I mean, we know all this stuff, and this might be going back to Maimonides in some way. So, like, the ethics that make possible to have a plural
Nomos.
Normative perspective.
Yes, but
Legal
not in the sense of, of tolerating. No, it's not about tolerance, not religious tolerance or normative tolerance or tolerance style Aaron Barak. No, not that kind of tolerance where we have our world but we accept that you have a different one. But actually saying, okay, there is very little that we share. What are the procedures, boundaries that we hold in order to have that, and then move on from there? And then that would prevent bureaucratization, or the handshaking happens, it happens out of fear, right? It doesn't happen because it's really important. It happens because I'm fearing that I'm not adhering. But if the boundaries are a little bit wider, and there's just a set, very clear rules, not principles, not reasonableness, not all this stuff, but very, very clear rules that guard communities also. They also guard, they perhaps they even prevent exit, to the disdain of some of us, right? But something about hardening certain rules and yet not confining the sameness, the standardization of the rules, or of the way we think about the rules. I think that's the difference. There's a difference there that, I don't know, I mean, everybody's exploring this right now because we're trying to figure out how we're gonna live around here. But I think that's maybe.
Yes. So I would just, when I was listening to the whole dialogue, I asked myself whether, in some sense, it's not only about methodology of cases that you were raising, but it's actually about kinds of classification more than anything else. That each of the speakers actually suggested kinds of classification, systems of classification, that within that classification then you can talk about case studies, but it is within an accepted system of classification that it works.
We are all positivists now.
No, what's amazing is you see this, and it is crazy. I mean, even I was reading my own talk, and I'm like, I cannot believe that you are writing this, because there is exactly this backlash. It's a self-boomerang of understanding that expanding this, the expansion, has really, possibly maybe irresponsible in the sense that the expansion of the principles without having an actual alternative in real life, or without saying, what does this mean in real life? How does this really work? Or what are the categories that are possible? So maybe it's that, right? You expand the boundaries, and then there's so much freedom that everybody resorts to this, and then,
I think in the wake of Ulrich Beck and Anthony Giddens, I would suggest a neologism to come out of this meeting. It is reflexive classification.
Mm-hmm. But I really think that this is what it's about.
Yeah.
In a serious way.
Thank you very much.